Now let's quickly sum up what I've been saying up to now, that Israel faces no existential threats. It can't make peace with the Palestinians for the reason I showed you, that they turned down that offer. If there's to be a solution, it'll be a regional solution. Every prime minister will handle these security threats exactly the same way. Doesn't matter who you vote for. Therefore, the logical transition is to realign the electorate according to economic ideology and religious beliefs. What will happen with the election next month? That may well be determined by the answer to this question. Why are we still afraid? That's it. That's all.
Good to see you, Richard. Thank you.
Yeah, it's nice to see you.
We can do it without a mic, I think.
Can we do it without a mic? Can everyone hear us?
Yeah.
Okay, if not, just
You can
shout.
definitely hear Mark
Sure.
with the radio voice.
Yeah,
I'll
Ruth
try to
says
speak
that a
loud.
lot.
I know, Mark, that your statement about economic issues is actually a plug for Gesher.
I'm trying to stay away from that.
You said it, not
My son's number 9 on the Gesher list, folks.
Gesher's going to need some help to get to 9, guys. So you're going to have to get out there and vote. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for coming out. I'm going to ask you a few questions that I wanted to ask you based on my reading of the book, questions that I wanted to ask you before, and then we'll take questions from the crowd. A few years ago, I was reading a book called The Imperfectionists. I don't know if you've heard of that book. It's a novel by a guy named Tom Rackman. It's about, it's a thinly veiled fiction about his time at the Herald Tribune, which he doesn't name in the novel. And in this book, he describes the types in the newsroom. There are different types, and one of the types that he's describing is kind of an ornery veteran who is picky about details and who walks around the newsroom, if I'm not mistaken, with his finger raised. And when I read the finger raised details, either this guy's talking about Mark Levy or there's a Mark Levy in every newsroom, which I think it might be the latter. I was hired by the AP in 2006. I was pretty young. One of the younger reporters in the Bureau at the time. Mark would have been, I would say, the oldest.
Yes.
In the Bureau.
I was always
most experienced. I would say, not the oldest, the most experienced, having worked for many years for English news here and then for CBC. I'm from Toronto. My parents remember Mark Levy from Jerusalem. And when I told them that I was working with Mark Levy, they were very impressed. And then at the AP for many, many years, for most of that time based in Jerusalem, and then at the very end based in Cairo, which is an interesting career turn for anyone. Let alone a guy with Mark's CV.
Can I just interject?
Interject away. It's your book.
I exiled myself to Cairo because of what I told you here. I could no longer work in journalism in this city.
Mark had to run away to the bastion of press freedom.
You know what?
Military dictatorship.
I found the same journalistic bullshit going on there that went on here, and that's why I wrote my first book called Broken Spring. Seriously, so I couldn't get away from it.
Yes. Well, we'll get to that too. Just so starting with a personal anecdote rather than with a journalistic one, your first experience of Israeli bureaucracy comes before you arrive in the country, and yet you come nevertheless in 1972. What exactly was that?
Oh yeah, that's a nice little story in the book. I had this, I won't go through the whole backstory, but when I decided to look into making Aliyah, I wrote a letter to the Israeli embassy in Washington saying, what do I do now?
So Mark's in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
No, I'm in South Bend,
South Bend, Indiana.
In the middle of the state.
1972.
In 1972 in South Bend, Indiana. So they sent me back a letter saying, make an appointment with the Aliyah Shaliyah in Cleveland. So I did. And I got in my tiny little car, and I drove 250 miles to Cleveland, and walked into this guy's office. He says, what are you doing here? There's an office in Chicago, 90 miles away. That was my first encounter with Israeli bureaucracy, and I laughed. You got to have a sense of humor, folks. He also laughed. So.
That was the first test. It was a test for you as an author.
Yeah,
if this guy still comes to Israel after we sent him 200 miles out of his way, then he's probably okay. Then he won't mind when Bituach Leumi pays 20 shekels instead of the 2,000 that they owe you. There are two, I guess, main themes in this book, or main subjects of the book. One is Israel, and the other is journalism. And those two things are obviously intertwined. You've been in Israel doing journalism since 1972, more or less straight until you retired.
No, and then
Couple years.
2014.
2014.
Yeah.
So that's a long.
But I'm still writing articles.
That's a
I'm
long
still-
time, right? It's not the retirement is obviously not
Yeah.
hasn't quite taken yet. Let's start with the question about journalism. You had a slogan, as you write in this book, which was, "I may not be first, but I'll be right." And you went with that. It obviously worked for you for many years in journalism, and that was an okay way to be a journalist for many, many years. Here for the CBC, for some prestigious outlets. By the very end, you had a wall of shame that to which you had pinned egregious examples of the decline of the journalistic profession. Mark at the AP Bureau had a little kind of booth, the radio booth. So in the Bureau, we'd all be doing our print stuff in the Bureau, and occasionally hear Mark's booming voice coming from the direction of the radio booth, where Mark also kept a wall of shame. And one of the quotes in the wall of shame was from, I guess, our boss, who was Tom Curley, the CEO of the AP.
Yeah.
The AP, by the way, for those of you who don't know, it's the world's biggest news organization, according to the AP. According to Reuters, Reuters is the world's biggest news. But these are the two big players in the news industry, hugely influential, a big deal. So Tom Curley, the CEO of the AP, had given his own, if your slogan was, "I may not be first, but I'm going to get it right," he had issued a kind of a missive to the company, "Speed matters more than heft."
Yes.
And that was supposed to guide us, and it was guiding us. I was hired in 2006. I left at the end of 2011, so my time at the AP really reflected kind of the collapse of the news industry as we knew it. In retrospect, that's clear. Just sketch the distance between those two slogans.
Well, there are several things going on at the same time. The idea that I won't be first, but I'll be right, and that this is acceptable, means that I'm a journalist and I can check my facts and think about what I'm writing before I actually write it. Okay? What happens now is what I call anti-social media. If I've ever made up a phrase that sticks, I hope that's the one.
I have a feeling a lot of people of your generation made up that phrase. That's just a guess. It's a stab I'm taking into there.
Well, all right, they got it from me. What happens in the age of anti-social media is you have to start reporting your story before you even know what you're reporting. Because you have to be the first one on Twitter with the story so that everybody will follow you. Now, anyone who has reported more than 15 minutes knows that the first thing you find out is probably not true. Or not the whole truth, for sure. And therefore, you're probably going to get it wrong when you put it out that quickly. Well, never mind, say the be-all and come-all of various journalist outlets. We'll continue tweeting through the day, and by the time the end of the day comes along, we'll have it right. So we'll fix it. Don't worry about a thing. Now, has anybody here studied more than half an hour of psychology? Does anybody here know what the importance of a first impression is? You don't even have to study psychology for that. So we're getting it wrong time and time and time again, and that's what sticks. So, jump from 1965, when I started as a professional journalist, to 2009 or 10, even 1988, depends anyway, that's what happened to my profession. And that is, the only question I don't want to hear from any of you people is, so what do we do about it? I don't have the slightest idea.
I guess we can wrap up the evening.
I don't know what to do. I read the 3 Hebrew newspapers and 2 Egyptian newspapers and as many American websites as I can every day. I'm retired. I've got time for this stuff, and I'm a professional. I know what I'm reading. I can't expect the ordinary person to do that. And how you go about it, I guess read something you don't agree with every day. That would help. That's a start. Can't help you.
Do you think that the change in the news industry and the way it works has something to do with the problems that Israel has had getting its story across?
Without doubt.
Is our story harder to sell in a landscape where speed matters more than heft?
Without a doubt. And here's where our society works against us, and I would not change it for a moment. Israel is one of the easiest places in the world to work. The telephones work, the internet works, the electricity stays on. And it's such a small country, you can cover any story anywhere in the whole area and sleep in your own bed at night. Now that is power steering. Right? So add that to the fact that the world has made up its mind that Israel is the bad guys and Palestinians are the good guys, and the fact that journalists in the Palestinian areas face unbelievable intimidation, that's in the book. I had a cup of coffee with a friend I've known for 35 years. We don't see each other that often, and she would ask me about something. He said, "That's in the book." And she asked me sometimes, "Oh, that's in the book." And she said, "Well, if you have to see you at all, just read the book." There is a large section in the book about the intimidation that reporters face in the Arab world, and Iran, of course, is not in the Arab world. And contrast that to the freedom we have here to do practically everything we want to do. There are certain parts of the West Bank that are closed military zones. Well, boo-hoo. You know, there are a few subjects we are not supposed to report about. It's obvious we shouldn't be reporting about a military activity that's in progress, even though we're live tweeting them now. So, you know, it's a whole new world. So, I guess I'll just stop there. You get the idea of what it's like to work here and what Israel has to put up with. Now, I wouldn't for a moment change Israel's freedom of speech, its freedom of the press, its openness as a society. Everyone not only will talk to you, everybody wants to talk to you, especially if they speak 4 words of English and they say them over and over and over again. Right? I wouldn't change any of that for a minute. But it does work to our detriment sometimes.
You write in the book that if you write another book, or when you write another book, although you say if, it's likely to be titled "The Most Overcovered Story in the History of Journalism."
Yes, no question about that.
Why would that be the title?
Well, when you look, Arab Spring put this whole thing to rest. The idea that the Israel-Palestinian conflict is the key to peace in the Middle East and peace on earth and goodwill toward men. The Arab Spring had nothing to do with Israel, even though
Well, that's what we want. That's what we want people to think.
yeah, certain news agencies who shall go unnamed weigh in so often about what Israelis think of Arab Spring that I wrote a satirical article that I included in my first book, based on the guy in the basement of the Defense Ministry who runs Arab Spring.
Yossi.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yossi's the Arab Spring Department. The bureau that we worked in was enormous in retrospect, and it's shrunk since then.
Very much so.
But at the time, I was told repeatedly that it was the AP's biggest international bureau, which is, I mean, sometimes a Jewish audience doesn't think that's strange. I've had this experience where I say, you know, the world's biggest news organization consider this to be the most important story in the world. People say, yeah. We had more people here at the time than we had in China, which has 1.3 billion people. And that's just one example of many. And you eventually end up in the Cairo bureau, which runs the whole Middle East, and you see what kind of sparse, staffing there is in most of the countries of the Middle East, and what intense coverage there is here. What do you think is the reason for the intensity of coverage here, beyond the ease of coverage you already mentioned?
I've wondered that myself for a long time, and until I have an answer, I can't write the book, granted. I think it's important to note, even though it should be obvious, that we're dealing here with a country of 8 million people and 3 million Palestinians. And I can tell you, having lived in Cairo for 2 years, that I can find you 40 million Egyptians who would trade places with Gazans tomorrow, because their lives in Egypt are so much harder than the lives of the poor victimized Palestinians in Gaza. And it's pretty shitty down there, literally. There are some descriptions in the book of what it's like to walk through a Palestinian refugee camp in the summer. But how can I put this? The idea that this little conflict is the most important story in the world is patently absurd, yet it's a given of journalism. It's a given of world politics. It's certainly a given of the United Nations, which as a result of its obsession with Israel has pretty much lost all its credibility except for the true believers, right? No one really cares. Have we torn down the barrier along the West Bank because some UN bureau told us we had to? Not exactly. You know, we basically tell them to take a flying leap, and that's fine with me. But journalists continue, not as much as before, but they continue to overcover this story because it isn't really that important. It really isn't that important. Also, is not moving anywhere and won't move anywhere because the Palestinians have pretty much ruled out any productive peace negotiations anytime in what journalists like to say is the foreseeable future. Right? So I think it's improving. I think the world is understanding that there are things that are more important than we are. And I know that sometimes we complain about the fact that the world press doesn't report about the rocket falling in the Sharon. Well, yeah, they don't. Maybe it's, considering the way they probably would handle it, it's probably a good thing, right?
Israeli house destroys Palestinian rockets.
Yes.
I actually saw that headline.
Well, I got a whole collection of actual headlines. Israelis killed Palestinian after Jerusalem attack. That was the BBC. The Palestinians the one who carried out the attack and killed 2 Israelis. That actually went on the BBC. I actually have that.
Yeah, it's in the book.
Yeah, it's in the book.